Hello, my name's Dave Emory, and this is For the Record program number 340, titled Mein Jihad, Islamofascism and Geopolitics. This is being recorded on December 9th of the year 2001, and this is yet another program in the ongoing series about the events in and around the attacks of September 11th. This is a complex event. I do not have time either in this hour or the other programs to cover it in its entirety. That's why it's an ongoing series. In order to properly set the context, one must take advantage not only of the World Wide Web, but also of a tape duplication service that I will tell you about later in the program, time permitting. At the outset, let me stress that in using the term Islamofascism, I do not want to be misunderstood as characterizing Islam as fascist. That is not the case. However, there is a powerful element in the worldwide Islamic community that is fascist and that is, in turn, inextricably linked with the worldwide fascist community. And it is that element of Islam that we are going to be focusing on in this discussion of Islamofascism. We're going to begin by taking a look at an article that appeared in the New York Times of Tuesday, December 4th of the year 2001. This is an article by Douglas Jehl, J-E-H-L. It's dateline Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, headlined An Ambassador's Journey from Rome to Mecca. And this deals with Torquato Cardilli, C-A-R-D-I-L-L-I, the ambassador of Silvio Berlusconi to the Saudi Arabian government. Silvio Berlusconi, an Italian fascist, member of the P2 Lodge, and an individual who has brought the Italian neo-fascist elements into a coalition government in Italy. And this is by way of launching the discussion of Islamofascism. And again, do not misunderstand me as characterizing Islam as fascist. But as is the case with elements of the Zionist movement, there is a fascist heritage within elements of Islam, as there is to the Israeli right wing. Not Israel, not Zionism, but the Israeli right wing. Turning to the New York Times of Tuesday, December 4th of 2001, we read of Torquato Cardilli, the Italian ambassador to Saudi Arabia. In Saudi newspapers, there have been dark allusions to Western bias and to the, quote, circles, unquote, in the American media that might be trying to torpedo the Saudi reputation. Crown Prince Abdullah, the country's day-to-day leader, has lashed out repeatedly at the kingdom's critics, charging that, quote, those newspapers and those who stand behind them are actually attacking our faith, unquote. Reading between the lines, this sounds very much like the Jewish-controlled news media, unquote, that one hears within the worldwide fascist community, and also from certain elements of the so-called progressive sector in this country. Continuing, little wonder, then, that the government-controlled Saudi press has now taken time to seize on a different kind of news. The ambassador from Italy, it was announced almost gleefully this week, has converted to Islam. And this again, Mr. Torquato Cardilli, the ambassador of the basically neo-fascist government of P2 Lodge member Silvio Berlusconi, the wealthiest man in Italy. Now, by way of developing some of the historical background to the connections between fascism and Islamic fundamentalism, that nexus being what I refer to as Islamofascism, it's important to understand the influence on the worldwide Islamic fundamentalist movement of the disciples of Abu Ali. That's spelled capital A-B-U, capital A-L-I. Now, that is a name that will not be known to many listeners, so I'm going to set the context for the discussion of the disciples of Abu Ali right now. We're going to turn to the book The Beast Reawakens by Martin A. Lee, published in hardcover by Little Brown, copyright 1997. Of the fascist movements in Middle Eastern nations or colonial territories in the pre-World War II and World War II period, Egypt in particular, Martin Lee writes, even though he loathed Arabs, he once described them as, quote, lacquered half-apes who ought to be whipped, unquote. Hitler was nonetheless the idol of the paramilitary green shirts, Egypt's indigenous proto-fascist movement, which referred to Hitler as Abu Ali, the good fighter, unquote. King Farouk, who ruled Egypt during the Hitler era, was also a Nazi sympathizer. The king's palace became a rendezvous point for Axis spies and couriers, Members of the royal family were involved in espionage for fascist Italy, and many of the king's mistresses did double duty as Nazi agents. With Rommel's army aiming to wrest Egypt from British colonial rule, German military intelligence stepped up its activities in the land of the Sphinx. Admiral Wilhelm Canaris, chief of the Abwehr, counted among his confidential agents 2 young Egyptian lieutenants, Abdel Nasser and Anwar Sadat, both of whom belonged to a secret officers association known as the Ring of Iron. Quote, "We made contact with the German headquarters in Libya," unquote, Sadat said of his wartime activities, again quoting, "and we acted in complete harmony with them," unquote. Imprisoned for 3 years by the British because of his subversive efforts, Sadat would later succeed Nasser as president of Egypt. So that, again, is the reference to Abu Ali. That was the Egyptian fascist movement's name for Adolf Hitler. And by the way, one of the translations of Jihad, best known as being translated as Holy War, is struggle. Hence the title of this broadcast, Mein Jihad. Now later, when Colonel Nasser overthrew King Farouk and became head of Egypt, he turned to the Central Intelligence Agency in order to get his Egyptian espionage service and general staff trained. And we talked about the fact that in turn the CIA turned to the Reinhard Gehlen Nazi spy outfit and SS post-war underground Odessa chief Otto Skorzeny. We talked about this connection at great length in For the Record program number 22, available from Spitfire. And specifically, we accessed information from E.H. Cookrich's Gehlen Spy of the Century, and also from the book Skorzeny, Hitler's Commando by Glenn Infield. Of the CIA/Reinhard Gehlen/Otto Skorzeny mission on behalf of CIA to Egypt, and in turn their mobilization of notorious Nazi war criminals in order to serve Nasser, Martin Lee writes as follows in The Beast Reawakens. The CIA gladly assented to Nasser's request for assistance in overhauling the mothballed Egyptian espionage apparatus. Such a sensitive assignment, however, required that American advisors not get their hands dirty. An off-the-shelf style of nation tampering was deemed preferable, so the CIA turned to the readily available Gehlen organization. Skipping down. After conferring with Allen Dulles, Gehlen decided that the best man for the job was Otto Skorzeny. The CIA chief concurred, confident in the presumption that Skorzeny, an ardent anti-communist, would help solidify Nasser's power base within the Egyptian military. Skorzeny was a, quote, particular favorite of American counterintelligence, having made friends with several of his captors before escaping from them, and was believed to be especially suited in temperament and personality for getting along with Nasser, remarked CIA officer Miles Copeland. It was a decision that U.S. policymakers would come to regret. By the way, I would add that as we looked at in For the Record program number 283, the Skorzeny mission was actually run at an executive level by former Gestapo chief Heinrich Müller, working as the security director for the remarkable and deadly Bormann organization, and in turn, later, the Müller/Skorzeny contingent put together the Libyan Secret Service for Muammar Gaddafi. Continuing. At first, Skorzeny played hard to get. He was approached in a routine manner, wrote Copeland, again quoting, then at a higher level, then through a personal visit from a certain well-known major general of the American Army, unquote. In the end, it took some diligent persuasion by Hjalmar Schacht, the former Nazi finance minister, to convince his nephew-in-law that it would be in everyone's best interest if he swaggered off to the pyramids on a mission for Gehlen and the Americans. Skorzeny accepted the assignment after he was assured that his stay in Egypt would be limited and that the CIA would supplement the salary offered by Nasser. Over the next year and a half, Skorzeny used CIA funds to recruit a slew of SS veterans and other Third Reich luminaries who jumped at the chance, quote, to inject new life and expertise into the Egyptian Secret Service, unquote, as Gehlen put it. More than 100 additional German advisors were pressed into service under Skorzeny's auspices. Some were drawn from the ranks of neo-Nazi organizations and remnants of the Odessa escape networks that crisscrossed through Madrid. By the way, the Odessa is the post-World War II SS underground. Continuing. Skorzany's team included fugitives like SS Major Leopold Gleim, who had been sentenced to death for wartime atrocities committed while he was the Gestapo chief of Poland, and Franz Bunch, a Goebbels propagandist best known for his pornographic book, The Sexual Habits of Jews. Miles Copeland of the CIA took it all in stride. Quote, "Perhaps someone will one day devise a means for inducing gentlemen of finer sensibilities to become security officers, but certainly no such means were known either by Nasser or his American advisors," unquote. And skipping down, of this Skorzany mission to Egypt on behalf of Galen and CIA. We're going to take a look at some of the liaisons that were formed by this group of basically Nazi war criminals and fascists in Egypt. And one of the main names here is that of the Grand Mufti, himself a major in the SS, the first leader of the Palestinian National Movement, an individual who wields profound influence on the contemporary Islamofascist movement, even though he died in 1974. His World Muslim Congress, funded in large measure by the Saudis, was one of the principal organs used against the Soviet Union in the Afghan War of the 1980s, and in that capacity it liaised closely with U.S. intelligence. It was that war that saw the genesis of Osama bin Laden as a warrior. Continuing. During the post-Farouk era, the Grand Mufti held court at a closely guarded villa on Sharia Aswit Street in Heliopolis, a suburb of Cairo. There he entertained delegations from throughout the Arab world while maintaining close contact with radical nationalists from Germany and other countries. Among those who gathered at the Mufti's home during the mid-1950s was his distant cousin, Yasser Arafat, then an engineering student at the University of Cairo. Raymer, that's Otto Ernst Raymer, himself a key SS man and war criminal, Raymer, who would collaborate with Arafat in the years ahead, also visited the esteemed Gross Mufti on several occasions. Over cups of strong Arabian coffee, they shared fond recollections of Adolf Hitler and indulged in the usual talk of driving the Jews into the sea. The Grand Mufti's network of sympathizers extended far and wide. Quote, "I did a couple of jobs for him, getting some documents from files that were otherwise unavailable," unquote, recalled H. Keith Thompson. By the way, H. Keith Thompson is the Yale-educated Sicherheitsdienst agent who became one of the prime functionaries of the post-World War II fascist underground, and who also worked very closely with Francis Parker Yockey, about whom we'll have a bit more to say later on in the program. A remarkable and encyclopedic biography of Francis Parker Yockey, Dreamer of the Day by Kevin Coogan, is one of the very best books ever written about fascism, and an absolutely indispensable work for understanding not only fascism in the 20th century, but in particular Islamofascism and its connection to the post-war fascist international. Returning to Martin A. Lee's discussion of the Grand Mufti, his liaising with Otto Skorzany and Yasser Arafat, we read, "The Grand Mufti's network of sympathizers extended far and wide." Quote, "I did a couple of jobs for him, getting some documents from files that were otherwise unavailable," recalled H. Keith Thompson. Otto Skorzany also collaborated with the Muslim religious leader. According to AFX Barron, a prominent British fascist, Skorzany was instrumental in funneling more than $1 million, which the Mufti had raised for anti-Zionist and anti-Jewish propaganda, to various neo-Nazi groups around the world. Several German propaganda experts adopted Arabic names when they emigrated to Egypt. Johann von Leers, one of the Third Reich's most prolific Jew-baiters, converted to Islam and became Omar Amin. He got a job with the Egyptian Information Ministry thanks to the good offices of the Gross Mufti. With von Leers in charge, Cairo's anti-Israeli propaganda machine churned out hate literature and inflammatory broadcasts on a regular basis. Assisting von Leers were dozens of European Nazis who welcomed a fresh opportunity to continue their vendetta against the Jews. They had regular access to Radio Cairo, which utilized a powerful CIA-constructed transmitter to spread the message throughout much of the Arab world. And by the way, I'm going to take just a minute here to review a couple of articles that we looked at in For the Record program number 335. If it seems that we're straying a little bit far afield, let's review a little bit from the Financial Times of Friday, November 9th of the year 2001. An article by Hugh Williamson and Philip Jacklin in Berlin headlined, "Far Right Has Ties with Islamic Extreme." Now remember Johann von Leers. We're going to come back to him. One of the people identified by the U.S. government as providing financial support to the al-Qaeda terrorist network is also a well-known figure in the European far-right political movement. The link is likely to raise new concerns over ties between Islamic and right-wing extremists. Ahmed Huber, a 74-year-old Swiss businessman and former journalist who converted to Islam in the 1960s, is a board member of Nada Management, a financial services and consultancy company which is part of the international Al-Taqwa Group. The U.S. says this group has long acted as financial advisors to al-Qaeda. Mr. Huber, who is based in Bern, is known in Switzerland and Germany as an Islamic fundamentalist who attempts to forge links to far-right and neo-Nazi movements. A spokesman for Germany's Office for the Protection of the Constitution, the Internal Intelligence Agency, said yesterday that Mr. Huber, quote, sees himself as a mediator between Islam and right-wing groups, unquote. He also belongs to the revisionist movement which believes the Holocaust did not take place, the spokesman said. Klaus Bayer, spokesman for the NPD, one of Germany's main far-right political parties, said Mr. Huber has often addressed NPD events. And by the way, as we looked at in For the Record program number 335, the NPD has as its top, that's the top German so-called neo-Nazi party, it has as its top American liaison organization the National Alliance, the parent organization of National Vanguard Books, which publishes Serpent's Walk and the Turner Diaries. Continuing. Mr. Huber confirmed that he had contact with associates of Osama bin Laden at an Islamic conference in Beirut. He is quoted in the Swiss media as saying that these people, quote, are very discreet, well-educated, very intelligent people, unquote. And reviewing another article that we looked at in For the Record program number 335, by way of setting some of the background of Ahmed Huber, this is from the website www.phdn.org/négation/foliçon/Rami, R-I-M-I.html. This was authored by Gilles Camassine and was copyright 2000. Of the background of Ahmed Huber, née Alfred Huber, and his liaison with a Swedish-based Islamic fundamentalist and anti-Semite and Holocaust denier. I'm going to read this in French and then translate it. Depuis son arrivée en Suède, Rami est très lié à l'islamiste pro-nazi suisse Ahmed Huber. Converti à l'islam au début des années 1960, Ahmed Huber côtoie dans l'Égypte nassérienne d'anciens nazis dont, principalement, l'ancien bras droit de Goebbels pour la propagande antisémite, Johann von Leers, lui aussi converti à l'islam sous le nom d'Omar Amin von Leers. Now in English, since his arrival in Sweden, Rami is very closely associated with the Islamic pro-Nazi Swiss Ahmed Huber. Converted to Islam at the beginning of the 1960s, Ahmed Huber was associated in Nasser's Egypt with old Nazis, among whom principally the old right-hand man of Goebbels for anti-Semitic propaganda, Johann von Leers, himself also converted to Islam under the name Omar Amin von Leers. So that again by way of jumping forward to the present and the world of Al-Qaeda. Now back to Nasser's Egypt, which saw the genesis of Ahmed Huber. Taking a cue from von Leers, Hans Oppler, another Goebbels protege, changed his name to Salah Shafar when he started preparing anti-Semitic material for the Nasser regime. And Louis Haydn, alias Louis Al-Hajj, a wartime employee of the German press agency, pitched in by translating Hitler's Mein Kampf into Arabic. The Egyptian government also published an Arabic version of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, the infamous forgery concocted by the Tsarist secret police, which Nasser recommended to a visiting Indian journalist in 1958. Quote, "It is very important that you should read it," unquote, the Egyptian president explained, again quoting, I will give you a copy. It proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that 300 Zionists, each of whom knows all the others, govern the fate of the European continent." Unquote. Prior to World War II, vicious European-style anti-Semitism, as typified by the protocols, was uncommon in the Arab world. While Jews were often discriminated against, they were rarely persecuted. But this began to change when Nazi propagandists assumed key positions inside the 10-story building that housed the Information Ministry in Cairo. Inevitably, the racialist views of these German expatriates rubbed off on Egypt's leaders, who launched a repressive campaign against members of the local Jewish community, many of whom were expelled from the country after their property and possessions had been confiscated. Such measures were applauded by von Leers and the other European fascists who found favor with Nasser in the mid-1950s. The Nazis on the Egyptian government payroll were engaged in more than just a war of words. According to the Times of London, in addition to serving as advisors to the Egyptian army, German war veterans were also instructing Arab volunteers in guerrilla tactics for possible action against British troops in the Suez Canal zone. The Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung subsequently reported that Otto Skorzeny had met with Colonel Nasser to discuss the training of commando troops. Several young Palestinian refugees, including Yasser Arafat, joined the Egyptian soldiers who were learning the ways and means of unconventional warfare. Although initially the intended target was the British, the future PLO chief realized that rigorous commando exercises would help prepare the Palestinian militants who were eager to renew the battle for their lost homeland. A grateful Arafat recognized Skorzeny's abundant skills in this area, and the two men struck up a relationship that lasted for many years. Apparently, the Palestinian leader was quite fond of the scar-faced paladin. Quote, "Arafat would have done anything for Otto," remarked Ilse Skorzeny. We're going to return to the Middle East and the Nasser contingent under Skorzeny. However, we're going to review a couple of aspects of, in fact, we're going to take a look at an aspect of Yasser Arafat that is not generally speaking recognized. We're going to turn now to, and the PLO, we're going to turn now to the book The Kingdom by Robert Lacey. This was published in hardcover by Harcourt Brace Jovanovich, copyright 1981, ISBN number 0-15-147260-2. What we're going to look at is who bankrolls the Palestine Liberation Organization and Yasser Arafat. A hint, it's much the same elements as have bankrolled Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden. Reading now from The Kingdom by Robert Lacey. Saudi Arabia is Yasser Arafat's principal financial supporter. Increasing Saudi subsidies to the PLO since 1973 have given the organization currency reserves estimated at over $1 billion, larger than those of many third world countries, and most inhabitants of the kingdom are proud that Saudi oil revenues should be supporting the cause of their Palestinian brothers. But the idea that Saudi Arabia should lend such massive support to men usually seen in the West as terrorists is deeply offensive to many people outside the Muslim world. This support to the Palestinians flatly contradicts in their eyes the word moderate, unquote, so often used by the kingdom's Western friends to describe Saudi international strategy, and this contradiction has lain at the heart of the foreign policy pursued since 1975 by King Khalid, Crown Prince Fahad, and their brothers. And again, the Saudis, the bankrollers of the PLO, which despite the tremendous poverty of most Palestinians has over $1 billion in foreign currency reserves, and that as of the 1980s, that raises more questions than it answers under the circumstances. One of the reasons why the Saudi funding of the PLO and the Grand Mufti and Otto Skorzeny heritage of Yasser Arafat does not get a great deal of publicity in this country is because of oil and the power politics involved in that. We're going to take a look at an article that appeared in the media this past week, and this was after the Israeli military retaliation for a couple of terror attacks last weekend. This is from the San Francisco Chronicle of Tuesday, December 4th of the year 2001. This is an article by James Bennett of the New York Times. It's Dateline Jerusalem, headlined, "Israel Strikes at Arafat." Let's take a look at who was the chief spokesperson, at least on this particular event, for Yasser Arafat. skipping down, there appeared to be no serious casualties in the Israeli assaults, but with the pleas of peacemakers in both camps overwhelmed by a roar of violence, both sides were braced for further bloodshed. Note that there were no serious casualties. Saeb Erekat, the Palestinians' chief negotiator, said that Sharon had declared war on the Palestinians, quote, full-out, full-scale war, unquote. And Saeb Erekat is not a name known to most Americans. He is one of the top Palestinian spokespersons. We have, however, dealt with him before, and we're going to turn, as the last item in this side, to the book The Secret War Against the Jews, co-authored by former Justice Department official and U.S. military officer John Loftus, as well as Mark Ahrens. The book was published in softcover and hardcover by the St. Martin's Press, copyright 1994. And due to the title, it has not gotten a lot of publicity. It is a remarkable book talking about fascism, the petroleum industry, the intelligence community, and the decades-long association among those. Now, of a group of Palestinian, quote, moderates, unquote, who were protégés of former Secretary of State James Baker, associated not only with the Bush family, but the Carlyle Group, and through that, the bin Laden family, we read, the CIA secretly brought several moderate Palestinians to the United States for intensive briefing. This group, codenamed Baker's Dozen, included most of the official Palestinian negotiating team with Israel. Hanan Ashrawi, Hana Senora, Saeb Erekat, Sari Nosabeh, and other lower-ranking Palestinians were summoned to Langley for a 3-day conference on integrating their politics with the U.S. Ashrawi was singled out as a good Palestinian image spokeswoman, dubbed by the company the Palestinian Golda Meir. So if some of the things I'm talking about do not ring familiar to listeners, that is not an accident. We're going to continue with a discussion of Islamofascism in the other side of this program. I've made references to other broadcasts. Those are available from Spitfire, S-P-I-T-F-I-R-E, one word. They're located at P.O. Box 1179, Ben Lomond, California, 95005. Email, mail, M-A-I-L, at spitfirelist.com, S-P-I-T-F-I-R-E-L-A-S-T.com. And you can visit the Real Audio-equipped Spitfire website at spitfirelist.com. There are detailed and annotated descriptions of all of the For the Record programs on the 9/11 attacks, For the Record 325 through 340 and counting, in the For the Record section of the Spitfire website. Sister station WFMU-FM is archiving the For the Record programs on Real Audio. More recent programs are streaming at wfmu.org/Dave Emory. There was another longer URL which has programs for download only on Real Audio. There are links to that URL on both the wfmu.org/Dave Emory website and in the For the Record section of the Spitfire website. This concludes Side 1 of Mein Jihad, Islamofascism and Geopolitics. This is For the Record 340, being recorded on December 9th of 2001. My name's Dave Emory. Thanks for listening. Hello, my name's Dave Emory, and this is Side 2 of For the Record program number 340, Mein Jihad, Islamofascism and Geopolitics. This is being recorded on December 9th of 2001, and as I stated in the first half of the program, I do not want to be misunderstood as characterizing Islam as fascist. That is not the case, but there are profound elements within Islam that are not only fascist, but associated with and inextricably linked with the worldwide fascist community. This is a program dealing with the events of September 11th and surrounding factors, and this is a continuation of that series. We're going to resume with an element of discussion that we looked at in Side 1 of this program, namely Johann von Leers, who was Goebbels' right-hand man for anti-Semitic propaganda for the Third Reich, Goebbels being Joseph Goebbels, the Third Reich's propaganda minister. We're also going to take a look at his worldwide links. Ultimately, Johann von Leers went to Nasser's Egypt under the Skorzeny/CIA mission and became the director for the Institute for the Study of Zionism for Nasser, basically a key anti-Semitic propagandist, along with many of his fellow Third Reich alumni. And one of the people who worked with von Leers in Nasser's Egypt was Alfred Huber. Now, Ahmed Huber, an alleged associate of al-Qaeda, certainly a member of the board of directors of an alleged al-Qaeda funding conduit, and an individual who was also closely associated with the Holocaust denial movement and the German NPD, the top German neo-Nazi party, and the associate organization of the American National Alliance, the publisher of not only the Turner Diaries, but also of Serpent's Walk, that I've used many times on this program. We're going to I'm going to do the best I can under the circumstances to explain a little bit about why or how elements of Islam happen to be associated with the worldwide fascist movement. To make a very long story very short, this is a manifestation of what German theoretician Karl Haushofer called geopolitics. When Germany was attempting to oust the United Kingdom from the Middle East and to gain control of the oil supplies, when Germany was also attempting to liquidate the already growing Jewish community in what is now called Israel, and when Germany was also seeking to help destroy the United States, another of its targets, it turned to what was called by Haushofer the colored world, or people of color, in many of the countries that had been colonized by, among other countries, the United Kingdom, and that also were believed by Haushofer and related elements to be of potential use in the struggle to annihilate the Jews and to ultimately destroy the United States. And it is in the context of Nazi geopolitics that Islamofascism, not Islam, but a fascist element within Islam, is to be considered. And it is in this context that al-Qaeda, which rails against the United States and Israel and which has documented Islamofascist connections, must also be considered. We're going to take a look at Johann von Leers, now or later Omar Amin von Leers, and we're going to turn to a remarkable book, one of the best books ever written about fascism. This book is Dreamer of the Day, subtitled Francis Parker Yockey and the Post-War Fascist International. This book is authored by the brilliant Kevin Coogan and published in soft cover by Autono Media Incorporated, copyright 1999. The book was also edited by Dave Mandel, an on-air personality at sister station WFMU-FM in Jersey City, New Jersey. Now, returning to the subject of Nasser's Egypt and the Nazi emigre community that was inextricably linked with not only Nasser's national security establishment, but also his anti-Semitic propaganda establishment, we're going to take a look at von Leers, and we're also going to take a look at a letter that was written by von Leers to his fellow Nazi intelligence operative, H. Keith Thompson, a post-war Yale graduate, who also has links to the world of Francis Parker Yockey, an American fascist and one of the most important operatives on behalf of the Third Reich and its underground post-World War II manifestation. Turning now to Dreamer of the Day by Kevin Coogan of von Leers, we read, "Not long after Nasser consolidated his hold on power, Johann von Leers moved to Cairo to help run Egypt's propaganda apparat. After converting to Islam, he changed his name to Omar Amin von Leers," unquote. General Otto Raymer also found sanctuary along the Nile. Raymer fled to Egypt after being threatened with arrest in Germany for his involvement with the radical right Socialist Reich Party, or SRP. He then helped train Egyptian commandos and Algerian guerrilla fighters in a base at Abbassia, Upper Egypt. In a June 1953 interview in Der Weg, he called upon all, quote, German patriotic forces, unquote, to aid in the creation of a strong Arab army. Now, again, just add about 38 years to this, and one can perhaps understand al-Qaeda and bin Laden as a geopolitical phenomenon. Continuing. Other German advisors trained Palestinian refugees for commando raids against Israel. With help from German military and technical advisors, Egypt soon became a vital support base for Algerian, Moroccan, and Tunisian guerrilla fighters fighting against France, as well as for anti-British movements in Aden and the Mau Mau insurgency in Kenya. The Nazi-Nasser axis, a post-war continuation of Haushofer's policy of alliance with the colored world, unquote, was evident in the strange mix of fascist, geopolitical, and anti-imperialist rhetoric that flowed from von Leer's pen. In an August 8, 1958 letter to H. Keith Thompson, Leers explained, quote, "One thing is clear. More and more patriot Germans join the great Arab revolution against beastly imperialism. In Algeria, half a company of German soldiers, dragging with them 2 French officers and 2 non-commissioned officers, have cut their throats in the view of the Algerian revolutionaries and have gone on the side of the Algerians and have embraced Islam. That is good. To hell with Christianity, for in Christianity's name, Germany has been sold to our oppressors. Our place as an oppressed nation under the execrable Western colonialist Bonn government must be on the side of the Arab nationalist revolt against the West. Let Adenauer be furious that honest German patriots are not extradited to him or to his British or American bosses by those freedom-loving Arab countries. May the British swine call us meddlers. In a short time, British meddling in the Middle East will be over, as it has finished in Iraq, where the infidel servants of British imperialism are all killed. Hamud al-Allah. The backing given by USA to the Jewish tyrants in Germany will make the German nation revolt. Indeed, for our nation there is only one hope, to get rid of Western imperialism by joining the Arab-led anti-imperialist group." That again from a letter from von Leers to H. Keith Thompson, and I think one can perhaps see the seed ideology, so to speak, for Al-Qaeda in this particular letter. Continuing with Coogan's text, Dr. Fritz Grobe was another ally of both the Arabs and the Kremlin. A German Lawrence of Arabia, unquote, Grobe had been the Nazi ambassador to Baghdad in 1940 when German intelligence backed an attempted anti-British revolt by Rashid Ali al-Gailani. By the way, as we've looked at in For the Record 287, annotated on the Spitfire website at www.spitfirelist.com, one of the top aides in the anti-British pro-Nazi uprising of Rashid Ali was a fellow named Khairullah al-Tufa, an Iraqi army officer who was also the uncle of and the political mentor and basically the guardian of Saddam Hussein. Saddam Hussein, by the way, has Hitler's original Mercedes. And again, this in the context of Islamofascism. Continuing. In his book Blowback, Christopher Simpson reports that Fritz Grobe turned his entire espionage network over to the Russians in 1945. Grobe then became a special advisor to the Soviets on Mideast affairs in 1951. According to the German press, Grobe even brokered the first meeting between Soviet emissaries and the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem. By the way, I would add that there are underground Reich, profound underground Reich, and Yakiite connections to the former Soviet Union. That is one of the reasons why it is the former Soviet Union. And it is to be hoped that people in positions of responsibility, including and especially U.S. intelligence, take stock of the former Soviet example in affecting some of the, or dealing with some of the liaisons that had been formed by this same milieu and the United States, and that have, in my opinion, doubled on the United States in the September 11th attacks. Continuing with Kevin Coogan's text, another key figure in German intrigue in the Middle East was Hjalmar Schacht. He, by the way, was the former Nazi finance minister. He first came to Egypt as General Naguib's guest of honor after the coup against King Farouk. Schacht's most daring Middle East power play was the Jihad agreement between German industry and Saudi Arabia in January of 1954. Under the terms of the deal, Saudi Arabia agreed to establish a fleet of supertankers to be built in German shipyards that would carry Saudi oil around the world. Aristotle Onassis was chosen to manage the shipping side of the operation. Besides making the Ruhr industrialists fantastically wealthy, Jihad threatened to break the Seven Sisters Oil Company's hegemony over the distribution of Middle East oil. The Jihad agreement was ultimately blocked by the Western oil cartel with help from the CIA. Yet Allen Dulles' CIA was surprisingly hesitant to confront Schacht. I would add, of course, that Allen Dulles is deeply connected to not only King Ibn Saud of Saudi Arabia, but also to the elements associated with him, including the Grand Mufti, and also the Bush family on this side of the Atlantic, and those connections have ultimately been propagated around the world. And over the years, of course, the Bush family has strong business connections to the Bin Laden family, as we've looked at in numerous broadcasts in this series and in other programs in the For the Record series. I would note that Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, the epicenter for this interdicted Jeddah agreement, is not only the capital for the Bin Laden business empire, but is also the financial capital of Saudi Arabia. Now, once again, jumping to the present, bear in mind the Ali Rashid uprising against the British that was undertaken by the Third Reich. It was unsuccessful, but as I mentioned, one of Ali Rashid's top aides was Khairullah al-Tufa, Saddam Hussein's uncle, the person who raised, for all intents and purposes, Saddam Hussein, and his political mentor, and he was pro-German, and the German/Nazi connections to Saddam Hussein have extended into the present period, as we've looked at in numerous broadcasts, including For the Record Program 287 and 295. The Financial Times of Thursday, November 29th of 2001, carried an article about some of the German reaction to reports that the United States might undertake a military action against Saddam Hussein after concluding the Afghan episode. The following article is a Reuters report from Berlin. It's headlined, "Berlin Warns U.S. on Iraq." It reads in part, Germany warned the U.S. yesterday against expanding its war on terrorism in Afghanistan to countries such as Iraq and Somalia, Reuters reports from Berlin. Once again, I've noted the profound German connections to the September 11th attacks. I talked about those in, among other broadcasts, For the Record 326, 331, and 335, and then 336 as well. Once again, one wants to maintain the awareness of geopolitics as it relates to Islamofascism. What we're going to do next is to take a look at the links between Johann von Leers and a pro-Nazi post-war publication called Der Weg and Peronist Argentina. Once again, turning to Kevin Coogan's Dreamer of the Day, we read of von Leers and his activities in Argentina. After Germany's defeat, Leers helped organize Nazi escape routes to Latin America. There is little doubt, unquote, writes historian Kurt Tauber, again quoting, that from the very beginning, von Leers played a considerable part in the organization and running of the Underground Railroad, which permitted the flight of threatened Nazis, unquote. He left Europe for Argentina to become Der Weg's editor in 1950. Der Weg was supported by a group of German industrialists, including Ludwig Freude, whose son Rodolfo was private secretary to Juan Perón. Freude was one of the four financiers who controlled much of the wealth sent from Germany to Argentina in the last years of the war in an operation codenamed Aktion Feuerland. By the way, parenthetically, I would add this will be recognizable to many veteran listeners as part of the Bormann Flight Capital program, about which I've spoken so many times. By the way, this reading of Kevin Coogan's text should not be misunderstood necessarily as an endorsement by Kevin Coogan of the working hypotheses that I present on this program. It's merely making use of the remarkable documentation that he has blessed us with. Continuing. Speaking of Freude, he worked closely with Ricardo Stout, a German-Argentine businessman, Dr. Heinrich Dorge, a former aide to Hitler's one-time finance minister, Hjalmar Schacht, and Ricardo von Leute, an officer of the Banco Alemán Transatlantico. The Nazi loot was deposited in vaults in the Banco Germanico and Banco Turquiste in the name of Eva Duarte, later and better known as Eva Perón. And that, again, about von Leers' activities in Argentina. We're going to jump to the present, and by way of taking a look at some of the geopolitical and Islamo-fascist evidentiary tributaries running in the direction of Argentina and back to the Middle East and to Al-Qaeda, we're going to take a look at an article from the New York Times of Wednesday, November 21st of the year 2001. This is an article by Clifford Krause of the New York Times, Dateline Buenos Aires, Argentina, November 20th, headlined, Court Ruling in Arms Case Frees Menem in Argentina, and it reads in part as follows. Former President Carlos Saul Menem was released from house arrest today after the Supreme Court ruled that prosecutors had failed to prove that he and his former brother-in-law were involved in a conspiracy to smuggle arms to Croatia and Ecuador between 1991 and 1995. Skipping down, today's ruling dropped charges of illicit association against Emir Yoma, Y-O-M-A, Mr. Menem's former brother-in-law and business associate, who prosecutors said was put in charge of a gun-running scheme by the former president. But by ruling that there was a lack of evidence, the court, by implication, extended the decision to Mr. Menem, who had been under house arrest since June in a friend's house outside Buenos Aires. Well, we looked at Yomagate, as this overlapping network of scandals was called, and the fact that several of the key witnesses either recanted or allegedly committed suicide, including someone named Alfredo Yabran. What we're going to look at now is actually what we're going to listen to is an excerpt of For the Record program number 109, which in turn was excerpted in For the Record broadcast number 330, and we're going to listen to the reading of an article from Clarín from August 2nd of 1998. This in turn, this particular article was researched for us by Dave White, and it deals with the potential visit of Mansour el-Kassar to Argentina. And what we're going to listen to are the links between Argentina and Syria, and in turn, the allegations of a connection between Mansour el-Kassar and two bombings that occurred in Argentina, that of the Israeli embassy in Buenos Aires in 1992, and also of the AMIA Jewish Cultural Center in 1994, the latter being, among other things, a repository of documents on Nazi war criminals in Argentina. We've also looked at links, evidentiary tributaries connecting the AMIA bombing with the Oklahoma City bombing, which in turn has links to September 11th. We also, in For the Record program number 328, looked at alleged links between both of those Argentinian bombings, the bombing of the Israeli embassy in 1992 and the AMIA Cultural Center, to the al-Qaeda network and to the attacks of September 11th. Bear in mind that key Syrian-born Iran-Contra operative Mansour el-Kassar had his name linked to both of the attacks in 1992 and 1994. He has denied those allegations.
Furthermore, al-Kassar has admitted having ties to pro-Iranian groups like Hezbollah in Lebanon. Government officials fear that while al-Kassar is improving his image, he will be damaging the image of the president. In addition, al-Kassar's presence could again push forward the Syrian trail to the two biggest terrorist attacks in Argentine history. The Syrian trail is the theory of Judge Juan Jose Galeano. It supposes the existence of support by Syrian sectors, along with pro-Iranian groups, in setting up the attacks. The key to explaining part of the origin of the attacks is understanding the complete scheme of the complex scheme of powerful persons close to President Menem. Al-Kassar was born in Yabrud, Syria, that's Y-A-B-R-U-D, a few meters from the home of the family of Menem's ex-wife, Zulima Yoma. Al-Kassar's friend Ibrahim al-Ibrahim, a Syrian intelligence agent, moved to Argentina in 1987. He married Zulima's sister, Amira, and was assigned to a key customs post at Aziza Airport. Franco Caviglia, whom al-Kassar is suing, maintains that al-Ibrahim was on duty when the exogene shipment arrived. At that time, the airport warehouses were controlled by Alfredo Yabran, who was also from Yabrud, Syria. Yabran had planned to flee to Damascus before his suicide on May 20th. So
that again, excerpted from For the Record program number 109. That same excerpt was in For the Record program number 330. Bear in mind that Emir Yoma, Menem's former brother-in-law, was born in Yabrud, Syria, the birthplace of Mansour al-Qassar, the birthplace of Syrian intelligence official and al-Qassar, Ibrahim al-Ibrahim, who in turn was married to the sister of Menem's former wife. Bear in mind that that same little town in Syria, Yabrud, was also the birthplace of Alfredo Yabran, who ran the airports at the Buenos Aires airport where the explosives for the two bombings were allegedly brought in by Mansour al-Qassar, and that Ibrahim al-Ibrahim then moved to Argentina and was working at that very same airport. Bear in mind also the allegations of an al-Qaeda connection to both of those two bombings. We're going to review an article from For the Record program number 338. This is from the Los Angeles Times of Tuesday, November 13th of the year 2001. This reviews a Syrian link to the bin Laden family. This article is dateline Latakia, Syria, and it's by Michael Slackman of the LA Times, headline, Family Ties That Bind and Bedevil. Skipping down. Najwa Ghanem's family is terribly worried about her safety. Not only is the mother of 11 living in the Taliban-controlled section of Afghanistan, she is married to the world's most wanted man, Osama bin Laden. Skipping down again. The Ghanem family has a double-sided bond to bin Laden. His wife and her siblings are also bin Laden's first cousins, a common phenomenon in the clannish world that exists both in Saudi Arabia and among the extended families of this part of western Syria. So while Ghanem's brothers and sisters are worried for her, they also are supportive of their cousin, whom they spent summers with as children, riding horses, swimming in the Mediterranean, and picking fruit in the orchards that blanket the countryside. While much attention has been focused on bin Laden's Saudi ties, his Yemeni father, who founded a Saudi construction empire, his 53 brothers and sisters who control a multi-billion-dollar fortune, bin Laden's maternal line has been comparatively ignored. And skipping down in this article, speaking of the fact that his ex-wife and first cousin comes from the city of Latakia, this city of 320,000 is a stronghold of the Alawite sect, an offshoot of Islam that controls Syria's government and security forces. And the Argentine link there to that same milieu is one that should not be forgotten. We're going to review another article from the aforementioned For the Record 338. This from the Financial Times of Thursday, November 29th of 2001. This is an article by Mark Huband talking about bankrolling bin Laden, and skipping down of Al-Taqwa we read, since September 11th, such global links have continued to be unearthed. In early November, U.S. authorities included Al-Taqwa, by the way, that's the group to which Ahmed Huber belongs, a Swiss-based financial services company, on its third list of accounts to be frozen because of suspected links to terrorism. Galeb Himat, the company's 63-year-old Tunisian-born executive and a board member of the Geneva section of the Kuwait-based International Islamic Charitable Organization, was also on the list. Himat denies any connection with Islamic militancy. However, a German intelligence report says the Munich-based Islamic Community of Germany, whose president is Himat, expressed, quote, pleasure, unquote, over the September 11th attacks at a closed meeting. Much of the military experience of the current generation of fighters who have joined al-Qaeda was gained in Bosnia, where Muslim forces and communities have received millions of dollars of funding from Iran, Saudi Arabia, and other countries. Skipping down. Saudis pumped more than $600 million into Muslim efforts in Bosnia, $380 million of it from individual donations, the rest from the government. We're going to review briefly an article that we've looked at, an element we've looked at before. This is an article by British intelligence analyst T.W. Bill Carr. Its headline, the article, this white paper is titled German and U.S. Involvement in the Balkans, a careful coincidence of national policies. And this concerns the Islamic declaration of Bosnian President Alija Izetbegović. Bear in mind the Bosnian connection to al-Qaeda. as well as the Al-Qaeda connection, alleged connection to Al-Taqwa and the milieu of Huber and von Leers. As we've looked at in, among other programs, for the record 330, Alija Izetbegovic, the president of Bosnia, was, as a young man, a member of the 13th Waffen-SS Division, or Handjar Division, a Bosnian Muslim Waffen-SS division recruited by the aforementioned Haj Amin al-Husseini, the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem. Of Alija Izetbegovic Islamic fundamentalism, we read, "At the same time, Alija Izetbegovic, who had been released early from jail in 1988, serving only 6 years of a 14-year sentence for pro-Islamic, anti-state activities, visited Islamic fundamentalist states in the Middle East, returning to Bosnia-Herzegovina to found the SDA, or Muslim Party of Democratic Action. His 1970 manifesto, Islamic Declaration, unquote, advocating the spread of radical pan-Islamism, projected Islam throughout the world by force if necessary, was reissued in Sarajevo at this time. His Islamic Declaration is imbued with intolerance toward Western religion, culture, and economic systems. This is also the theme projected in his book, Islam Between East and West, first published in the U.S. in 1984 and in Serbo-Croat in 1988, shortly after he was released from prison in the former Yugoslavia. In his writings, he states that Islam cannot coexist with other religions in the same nation other than as a short-term expediency measure. In the longer term, as and when Muslims become strong enough in any country, then they must seize power and form a truly Islamic state." And reviewing an aspect of the anti-Soviet effort in Afghanistan, turning once again to The Beast Reawakens by Martin A. Lee. Speaking of the World Muslim Congress, based in Pakistan, the World Muslim Congress was initially headed by the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, who, like his friend H. Keith Thompson, stood by the Third Reich until his death in 1974. And after discussing Saudi funding for the World Muslim Congress, skipping down, we read, "Soon, the World Muslim Congress began working closely with U.S. intelligence and Pakistani military officials who were covertly supporting the Afghan Mujahideen in their fight against the Soviet-installed regime in Kabul. This effort was strongly endorsed by Dr. Inamullah Khan, who served for many years as the Pakistani representative to the Nazi-infested World Anti-Communist League, which played an important role in the Reagan administration's secret war, unquote, in the Golden Crescent." And it was that organization, the WMC, and the anti-Soviet Afghan war that saw the genesis of Osama bin Laden, the Grand Mufti, the founder of the 13th Waffen-SS Division, that had in its ranks Alija Izetbegovic, the now current president of Bosnia. This concludes Side 2 of For the Record program number 340, Mein Jihad, Islamofascism and Geopolitics. This is being recorded on December 9th of 2001. My name is Dave Emory. Thanks for listening. That's spelled capital A-B-U, capital A-L-I. Now, that is a name that will not be known to many listeners, so I'm going to set the context for the discussion of the disciples of Abu Ali right now. We're going to turn to the book The Beast Reawakens by Martin A. Lee, published in hardcover by Little Brown, copyright 1997. Of the fascist movements in Middle Eastern nations or colonial territories in the pre-World War II and World War II period, Egypt in particular, Martin Lee writes, "Even though he loathed Arabs, he once described them as, quote, lacquered half-apes who ought to be whipped, unquote. Hitler was nonetheless the idol of the paramilitary green shirts, Egypt's indigenous proto-fascist movement, which referred to Hitler as Abu Ali, the good fighter, unquote. King Farouk, who ruled Egypt during the Hitler era, was also a Nazi sympathizer. The king's palace became a rendezvous point for Axis spies and couriers. Members of the royal family were involved in espionage for fascist Italy, and many of the king's mistresses did double duty as Nazi agents. With Rommel's army aiming to wrest Egypt from British colonial rule, German military intelligence stepped up its activities in the land of the Sphinx. Admiral Wilhelm Canaris, chief of the Abwehr, counted among his confidential agents two young Egyptian lieutenants, Abdel Nasser and Anwar Sadat, both of whom belonged to a secret officers association known as the Ring of Iron. Quote, "We made contact with the German headquarters in Libya," unquote, Sadat said of his wartime activities, again quoting, "and we acted in complete harmony with them," unquote. Imprisoned for 3 years by the British because of his subversive efforts, Sadat would later succeed Nasser as president of Egypt. So that, again, an ardent anti-communist would help solidify Nasser's power base within the Egyptian military. Skorzeny was a, quote, particular favorite of American counterintelligence, having made friends with several of his captors before escaping from them, and was believed to be especially suited in temperament and personality for getting along with Nasser, remarked CIA officer Miles Copeland. It was a decision that U.S. policymakers would come to regret. By the way, I would add that as we looked at in For the Record program number 283, the Skorzeny mission was actually run at an executive level by former Gestapo chief Heinrich Müller, working as the security director for the remarkable and deadly Bormann organization, and in turn, later, the Müller/Skorzeny contingent put together the Libyan Secret Service for Muammar Gaddafi. Continuing. At first, Skorzeny played hard to get. He was approached in a routine manner, wrote Copeland, again quoting, then at a higher level, then through a personal visit from a certain well-known major general of the American Army, unquote. In the end, it took some diligent persuasion by Hjalmar Schacht, the former Nazi finance minister, to convince his nephew-in-law that it would be in everyone's best interests if he swaggered off to the pyramids on a mission for Galen and the Americans. Skorzeny accepted the assignment after he was assured that his stay in Egypt would be limited and that the CIA would supplement the salary offered by Nasser. Over the next year and a half, Skorzeny used CIA funds to recruit a slew of SS veterans and other Third Reich luminaries who jumped at the chance, quote, to inject new life and expertise into the Egyptian Secret Service, unquote, as Galen put it. More than 100 additional German advisors were pressed into service under Skorzeny's auspices. Some were drawn from the ranks of neo-Nazi organizations by way of launching the discussion of Islamofascism. And again, do not misunderstand me as characterizing Islam as fascist. But as is the case with elements of the Zionist movement, there is a fascist heritage within elements of Islam, as there is to the Israeli right wing. Not Israel, not Zionism, but the Israeli right wing. Turning to the New York Times of Tuesday, December 4th of 2001, we read of Torquato Cardilli, the Italian ambassador to Saudi Arabia. In Saudi newspapers, there have been dark allusions to Western bias and to the, quote, circles, unquote, in the American media that might be trying to torpedo the Saudi reputation. Crown Prince Abdullah, the country's day-to-day leader, has lashed out repeatedly at the kingdom's critics, charging that, quote, those newspapers and those who stand behind them are actually attacking our faith, unquote. Reading between the lines, this sounds very much like the Jewish-controlled news media, unquote, that one hears within the worldwide fascist community, and also from certain elements of the so-called progressive sector in this country. Continuing. Little wonder, then, that the government-controlled Saudi press has now taken time to seize on a different kind of news. The ambassador from Italy, it was announced almost gleefully this week, has converted to Islam. And this, again, Mr. Torquato Cardilli, the ambassador of the basically neo-fascist government of P2 Lodge member Silvio Berlusconi, the wealthiest man in Italy. Now, by way of developing some of the historical background to the connections between fascism and Islamic fundamentalism, that nexus being what I refer to as Islamofascism, it's important to understand the influence on the worldwide Islamic fundamentalist movement of the disciples of Abu Ali. Hello, my name's Dave Emory, and this is For the Record program number 340, titled Mein Jihad, Islamofascism and Geopolitics. This is being recorded on December 9th of the year 2001, and this is yet another program in the ongoing series about the events in and around the attacks of September 11th. This is a complex event. I do not have time either in this hour or the other programs to cover it in its entirety. That's why it's an ongoing series. In order to properly set the context, one must take advantage not only of the World Wide Web, but also of a tape duplication service that I will tell you about later in the program, time permitting. At the outset, let me stress that in using the term Islamofascism, I do not want to be misunderstood as characterizing Islam as fascist. That is not the case. However, there is a powerful element in the worldwide Islamic community that is fascist and that is, in turn, inextricably linked with the worldwide fascist community. And it is that element of Islam that we are going to be focusing on in this discussion of Islamofascism. We're going to begin by taking a look at an article that appeared in the New York Times of Tuesday, December 4th of the year 2001. This is an article by Douglas Jehl, J-E-H-L. It's dateline Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, headlined An Ambassador's Journey from Rome to Mecca. And this deals with Torquato Cardilli, C-A-R-D-I-L-L-I, the ambassador of Silvio Berlusconi to the Saudi Arabian government. Silvio Berlusconi, an Italian fascist, member of the P2 Lodge, and an individual who has brought the Italian neo-fascist elements into a coalition government in Italy. And this is the reference to Abu Ali. That was the Egyptian fascist movement's name for Adolf Hitler. And by the way, one of the translations of Jihad, best known as being translated as Holy War, is struggle. Hence the title of this broadcast, Mein Jihad. Now later, when Colonel Nasser overthrew King Farouk and became head of Egypt, he turned to the Central Intelligence Agency in order to get his Egyptian espionage service and general staff trained. And we talked about the fact that in turn the CIA turned to the Reinhard Gehlen Nazi spy outfit and SS post-war underground Odessa chief Otto Skorzeny. We talked about this connection at great length in For the Record program number 22, available from Spitfire. And specifically, we accessed information from E.H. Cookrich's Gehlen Spy of the Century, and also from the book Skorzeny, Hitler's Commando by Glenn Infield. Of the CIA/Reinhard Gehlen/Otto Skorzeny mission on behalf of CIA to Egypt, and in turn their mobilization of notorious Nazi war criminals in order to serve Nasser, Martin Lee writes as follows in The Beast Reawakens. The CIA gladly assented to Nasser's request for assistance in overhauling the mothballed Egyptian espionage apparatus. Such a sensitive assignment, however, required that American advisors not get their hands dirty. An off-the-shelf style of nation tampering was deemed preferable, so the CIA turned to the readily available Gehlen organization. Skipping down. After conferring with Alan Dulles, Gehlen decided that the best man for the job was Otto Skorzeny. The CIA chief concurred, confident in the presumption that Skorzeny